During private member statements, I call the member for Maitland.
And I thank the temporary speaker. I rise to speak about the recent response by our government to the April superstorm. And I note that before my entry into Parliament, I was a bus operator of some years' experience and had actually contributed to manuals on critical incident management and attended an ATEC workshop on looking at community natural disaster management from government and community sectors. So it's an area that I have quite a lot of interest in. But it will, if you excuse me, Mr Speaker, with the pun, it was a perfect storm. As a new MP, like many of my colleagues in the Hunter, we just received the keys to our offices, and I, in fact, had spent 6 days in my office prior to the storm hitting. I woke that morning to 7 trees down in my backyard, including 2 across my driveway, narrowly missing my car, no power, no phone, no running water. And since that time, about another 12 or 13 trees have fallen down, and luckily Ausgrid removed some of those trees a couple of days later so I could actually get out of my property again. I found out that the Premier was coming to my electorate by a text message from one of my colleagues in Sydney some 4 hours before he came. It then resolved to how would I contact the Premier. The scorched earth policy that we have in the handover of offices in this place does not help new members who have to suddenly deal with an emergency, and I think that's actually a danger to our community. I tried several means, including, I think in the end I was successful by emailing his electorate office generic email and got some contact. I was then sent to the Rutherford SES office, and I advised the Premier that although he was in the helicopter and he would be able to make the times of his briefings, me being in the car and subject to flooding and congestion would not be able to. So eventually I did get to Medford, where he did go, and he didn't go to Rutherford. I missed that briefing but was able to speak to the media to thank the many SES volunteers who'd come from around Australia to help us, to urge people not to use flooded and congested roads, and generally support the government's messages on safety. And my daughter Jessica helped during this time because some of my staff couldn't make it to the office. I've actually finished reading the biography of Anna Bligh, the first female Premier of Queensland, and I would direct the Premier and recommend this book to him because she's someone who earned enormous respect from her bipartisan treatment of the opposition and her state and the community in times of crisis. And I also note during a conversation with the Honourable Catherine Cusack, MLC, in the other place, that she spoke of when Yassi cyclone came through, the Ballina National local member Don Page was taken by Christina Keneally up to his electorate when they were trying to look at the extent of the storm damage. It's sad that when this storm hit, members on my side of this place told me and warned me that, you know, due to their experiences in the Blue Mountains fires, that the government would attempt to shut them out and hence their community. But local members are actually a part of the government process, and we are the people that our community turns to in times of crisis, from the mobility gentleman who came to my office when he was on the last batteries of his mobility scooter and just needed a cup of tea and a warm-up, and some help from the Family and Community Services, which we were able to refer to. The calls from people who were in Sydney trying to reach out to loved ones stranded on Gillieston Heights. In fact, it really is such an important thing that we do these, manage these events in a bipartisan event. Just today I noticed that LLS noted in the disaster recovery meeting that they were having issues contacting some of the farmers, and the member for Port Stephens drew attention to the plight of an organic farmer who was giving up, not knowing about Category C funding and other grants, which is something that both myself and the member for Port Stephens are using our electoral allowances to provide that information to the community. I don't include this information on the public record as a blame game. I just want there to be some sort of inquiry into this event. I note that the Ministry for Police and Emergency Services will move into justice from 1 July. I know that there's some funding on the table for SES Communications which failed, and on the table in the budget. These are all things that are good, and I want to support the government on this, but they really need to include members of the opposition, because at some stage we need to acknowledge that everyone in our community is part of this state, whether they vote Liberal, Labor, Nationals or Greens or anyone else, and the government should be dealing with all of us fairly for the good of our community, particularly in times of crisis. Thank you, Mr. Temporary Speaker.